Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the first regional meeting as part of my many deferred items in my programme. This is the meeting that was originally scheduled for the 11th of March and had to be postponed. And it's a very warm welcome to all members and presenters from the northwest of England and Northern Ireland. And I don't have any announcements, you will be pleased to hear. So at the moment, there are no further changes to my planned programme. I am looking forward to meeting many people at the first physical meeting that we plan to hold on the 24th of June. So may I also welcome particularly Martin Davis and Colin Hoffman, who have spent a lot of time organising the presentations this afternoon and advising on various issues, and also to Mike Hoffman, who is co-host with Mark. And let's proceed with the first presentation. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Julian Tweed, and his presentation is Liverpool Late Fees. Over to you, Julian.
Late fees from Liverpool. I'm only looking at one aspect of the late fee arrangements at the busy office in Liverpool, and that is those fees particularly relevant to mail carried directly overseas from the port itself. So it's a limited look at late fees. But first, it might be useful to say just what I'm talking about when I say a late fee. A late fee can be defined as a payment over and above the normal postage charge to allow inclusion in an otherwise closed dispatch of mail. So we're not necessarily talking of late in the day with a late fee, just late in relation to a specific dispatch. This is the first cover I'm going to show. Rowland Hill in the late 1840s was very keen to impose some sort of conformity on the charging of late fees outside London. They'd previously been set locally, and they were a bit of a mess. Other than fees connected to the railways, which is another story, another time perhaps, he recommended a nationwide standard charge of a penny with a late fee of threepence for a short period before final closure. But the higher fee was only to be offered at a limited number of larger towns and cities. With this in mind, the threepenny fee was trialled in Liverpool first during 1847. And here we have a May 1848 cover to Philadelphia, paying that threepenny fee and 2 shillings double rate postage. The scheme was deemed successful, and it was made available to another 31 larger offices, not all of whom used it from 1849 onwards. Here are 2 more Philadelphia items going to Philadelphia, 1848. These were posted during a period when the British and American post offices were in dispute over how the various elements of the postal charges levied on transatlantic mail were to be shared between them. And during that period, which ran from June 24th to 29th of December 1848, the so-called retaliatory rate period, the Americans ignored any prepayment in Britain and charged all mail on arrival as if unpaid. And that's what happened with these 2 covers. Only the late fees paid, a penny on the lower one and threepence on the one above, actually worked. The shilling postage paid in each case was effectively wasted, but needed to be paid to satisfy the British Post Office. It was quite soon realised by a local post office employee, in fact, a Mr. Brownlow, that there would be potential demand for a very last-minute posting at the new floating landing stage that had been erected at the pier head, and facilities were provided there from August 1849, but only on payment of a substantial shilling late fee. A movable office, deemed the floating receiving house, was provided, and it just big enough to accommodate a clerk and a stamper. And you can see it here at the right hand side of this picture, which is taken from the Illustrated London News. It's showing the Swedish soprano, famous soprano Jenny Lind, departing Liverpool. She's standing on the vessel moored in the dock there, presumably singing to the crowds. But on the right hand side of the picture, you can see a little hut, and on the side of that hut is painted below a crown the receiving box for American mails, and that is the floating receiving house. The service was very popular despite the high fee, and turned out to be an excellent earner for the post office. And after the inevitable objections from the Treasury, Brownlow was eventually granted a handsome gratuity, £200. And here's a couple of covers posted at that floating receiving house. It was issued with its own circular date stamp, Liverpool at the top, floating FRH at the base, and at least until 1856, early 1856, a code letter A appeared below that, the date, in the date stamp. They didn't use the date stamp to cancel the stamps. It usually appears on the reverse of covers. The stamps themselves were cancelled using a fairly standard Liverpool 466 barred oval numeral cancel. Both the date stamp and the 466 were usually struck in black, but a very few examples exist in red from sailings in October and November 1850, and there are examples here of both colours being used. Like all late fees, the FRH late fee was charged per item and didn't increase with incremental postage rates. So what we're looking at here is a cover to New Orleans posted in May 1853, paying 4 shillings, which was the quadruple postage rate, and the shilling FRH fee. For those of you, and I know there's a few looking who know more about this than I do, there seems to have been some sort of confusion with the accountancy on this cover, and I've explained that on the slide. Or at least to the best of my abilities, I've explained it on the slide. These two covers, both posted on 27th of June 1857, both going to the States, paying different late fees, but carried on the same vessel, Cunard's Arabia. The cover on the left going to Boston paid the town threepenny fee that we talked about at the start, and the cover on the right paid the FRH shilling fee. Rather nice to have two covers on different fees carried on the same vessel. If you note the 1850s, the FRH cover on the right, the date stamp has now lost that A code at the base that it had to start with. Contracted vessels going across the Atlantic, began to put in at Queenstown, now Cove, in Southern Ireland during 1859. And much outward mail that had previously been routed to Liverpool was now more advantageously sent directly there. As a result, the demand at the FRH dropped off a cliff, and despite a reduction in the late fee to 6pence, the fee and the service was withdrawn at an as yet unknown date, but sometime before 1864. And the cover you're looking at on this slide is one of the 4 6penny fees so far recorded. That's in comparison with about 100 recorded items from paying the shilling fee. In fact, it's the latest recorded strike of the FRH to date. And then after 1864, there was a long period without any dockside late fee facilities. But in the late 19th century, a new late fee was being offered from a portable office again, now aimed not at transatlantic mail, but at West African mails. The fee was again set at £1, and a circular date stamp was issued, this time with Liverpool at the top and landing stage at the base. I've managed to record 5 uses on cover so far of this late fee, although there are quite a few more examples of the date stamp on stamps, loose stamps or on piece. This use is to Togo, dates from July 1903. Late fees on overseas mail were withdrawn during the early part of the First World War, and it took quite a while for them to be reintroduced after peace. But for the most of the 1920s and up to 1939, there were Saturday sailings to the States from Liverpool, and they were served by a special 6-penny late fee at the head office, not on the quayside, but back at the head office. And this is at a time when most of the late fees in Britain were set at only a halfpenny. As with the West African service, we don't have many records of the 6-penny fee being paid, but this one is from 1927, contrasted with a halfpenny late fee for another transatlantic piece of mail from a slightly earlier date. War came again in 1939, and overseas late fees were again suspended. And this time they never effectively reappeared. And so that's the end of my story today, for which I thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Julian. Moving on then to our second display, and may I invite David Sweeney, who's in Northern Ireland, to present his display, Postal Conventions of the Kingdoms of Sardinia and Italy from 1850 to 1863. Over to you, David.
Good afternoon, everyone, and may I pass on greetings from all the members of the Northern Ireland region of the Society. My first look at this is to give an example of the convention between the UK and Sardinia, which came into force on the 1st of February 1858. The convention provided a standard letter rate of 60 cents for 7.5 grams. The rate was based on an exchange rate of 10 cents Italian to 1 penny UK. That is 1D, of course. On slide 2, we have an example of a letter carried from Turin to Sheffield. The rate of 60 cents has been paid using a 20 cent and 40 cent value from the Sardinian Series 4 issue. Now, all the stamps you see this afternoon, apart from the last page, are from Series 4. The stamps on this envelope have been cancelled at Turin on the 28th of April, 1858. The letter on its route to Sheffield was stopped in London and struck with a paid hand stamp on the 2nd of May. The letter eventually arrived in Sheffield on the 3rd of May, where it was back stamped. We move to slide 3. This is relating to the use of the convention with the UK for carrying mail to West Africa. The rate was set at 80 cents per 7.5 grams. The example on show is addressed to the British agent in Lagos, and it has been paid at 80 cents using the 80 cent value from that series. The top of the letter indicates with the manuscript 66 the amount to be credited to the UK. All right, I want to move on now to the Postal Convention with France. That will first of all be the 1850 Franco-Sardinian Postal Convention, effective from the 1st of July 1851. The letter that we're interested in this is on slide 4. The convention set the standard letter rate at 50 cents for 7.5 grams. And that was at an exchange rate that 1 Italian lira equaled 1 franc. At the end of the 1850s, there was great movement in Italy for reunification, and the Second War of Independence broke out on the 29th of April 1859 and finished on the 11th of July 1859. The outcome of that is that Lombardy, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, became a province of the Kingdom of Sardinia. And mail from Lombardy was subjected to the Sardinian tariffs. The letter, which is shown on slide 4, is a two-step letter that's indicated on the left-hand side of the row of stamps with a manuscript 2. This meant that it was a second step rate and you had to pay 1 lira. The charge has been paid using a horizontal strip of 5 of the 20-cent value. This is the largest strip possible for horizontal stamps, as the sheets were printed in rows of 5. The letter is back stamped on arrival on June the 1st. And moving on to slide 5, we are looking at mail to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. For those who are not too sure about what this is, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was the Kingdom of Naples and the Kingdom of Sicily, with one monarch. Now, the 1850 convention provided for the carriage of Sardinian mail by French packets at a charge of 70 cents. 70 cents if you were sending a letter to Naples, which was in the Kingdom of Naples, or 70 cents if you were sending a letter to Messina, which was in the Kingdom of Sicily. The entire shown is from Genoa to Naples. It's dated the 29th of June, 1860, and the sender has endorsed the top of it, stating that he wants the letter to be carried by the French packet. Upon arrival at Naples, the Neapolitan Post Office has applied a charge shown in manuscript as 24 grana. This was to be paid on delivery, and 24 grana in old sterling was equivalent to 10d. So, having looked at a letter from Sardinia to the Kingdom of Naples, now we want to look at one to the Kingdom of Sicily. On slide 6, this shows a letter which has been charged at 2 lira 10 cents. This has been paid by the use of a horizontal strip of 5 of the 40-cent value, used in conjunction with a pair of the 5-cent value printed in myrtle green. The stamps have been cancelled at Genoa on the 21st of April, 1857, and when it arrived in Messina, the postal clerk put a 66 grana mark on the front in manuscript. The letter, by the way, arrived in Messina on the 25th of April, which was a 4-day trip. The 66 grana would be equivalent to 2 shillings and 4 pence. Moving on to slide 7. The slide here is looking at the 1860 Franco-Sardinian Postal Convention, which became effective on the 1st of January 1861. The convention introduced a reduced letter rate of 40 cents, and it increased the weight step from 7.5 to 10 grams. The example of a letter under that charge is shown, and it is a wrapper addressed to Turin from Bergamo, postmarked 12th of March 1863. The 40-cent rate in this letter has been paid in what I describe as a rather uncommon method. It has used a strip of 4 of the 10-cent value. Normally, you would have a simple 40-cent stamp or a pair of 20 cents. Here we have the oddity of having 4 10 cents. The back, which has a number of back stamps on it, indicates that the letter traveled via Milan to Turin, to Marseille, and arrived in Toulouse on the 14th of March. if we go to slide 8, please. The 1860 convention we just mentioned from the previous slide had a paid letter rate of 40 cents. However, if the letter was unpaid, the charge was 60 cents per 10 grams. And we have a letter unpaid addressed to Paris from Livorno. A hand stamp of 6 has been applied, indicating that the charge to be collected on delivery. The letter has been backstamped in Paris on the 23rd of May. And looking again at 1860 Franco-Sardinian Postal Convention, on slide 9, we have a wrapper to Lyon from Turin, dated 9 June 1862. There is a manuscript 2 in the top left-hand corner, which indicates that this is a second step letter as well. The charge of 80 cents has been met by the uncommon use of the 80-cent value. The wrapper was backstamped at Lyon on the 11th of June 1863. On slide 10, we look at mail to the Ottoman Empire. The 1850 and the 1860 Franco-Sardinian Convention allowed mail to be carried by French packets to the French offices in the Ottoman Empire. The rate was set at 80 cents per 7.5 grams. The entire that we have in view is from Naples to Constantinople, and it's dated the 12th of October, 1863. Again, this has been endorsed at the top by the sender, indicating that they wanted it to be carried by the French packet. The charge for this letter is set at 2 lira 40, using 6 40-cent values. Now, this tells us that this is a third step letter. The stamps have been cancelled at the Naples port office, and alongside the CDS on the right, you'll see a PD mark, paid to destination. Now, this was to enable the person who this was addressed to, when they went to the French post office in Constantinople, they didn't have to pay any money. It was paid to destination. And I come to the final item in my talk on slide 11. It's relating to mail to the Papal States. There was no postal convention in existence with the Papal States. And the way you had to get mail to the Papal States from Sardinia was to either exchange mail overland by paying postage to the border, or if you wanted to send it by sea, by paying postage to the port of disembarkation. This charge was set at 20 cents by both the kingdoms of Sardinia and followed by the Kingdom of Italy. The Papal Post Office added a further charge for the delivery to destination. The letter from Naples to Rome is dated the 11th of October 1862. The postage has been charged at 80 cents, indicating a fourth step letter. The charge has been made using an 80-cent value from the provisional perforated issue of 1862. The letter arrived in Rome on the 13th of October 1862, where the additional charge was added by the post office and is shown in manuscript as being 40 bioche. That 40 bioche would be equivalent to 1 9 in sterling. Now that concludes my display for this afternoon. I hope it went well for you, and I thank you for watching. Thank you very much.
David, it went extremely well. Thank you for that fascinating display, and also for expressing the best wishes of members and fellows in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much indeed. We move now to the third presentation, And may I invite Ian Cubbin to tell us about early mail to and from Central Africa from 1858 until 1891. Over to you, and thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you, Richard. I hope you can all see that. Victorian England was absolutely shaken to the core when David Livingstone described the horrors of the slave trade on his return from his first missionary journey in 1857. And his call to Africa, of course, led to the formation of the university's mission to Central Africa and the financing of his second missionary journey, when, of course, he discovered the Victoria Falls, which many consider the starting point for Rhodesian philately. This expedition was financed by public subscription and a grant of £5,000 from the British government. Livingstone returned to Africa as Her Majesty's consul with a team of 6 Europeans. His brother, the Reverend Charles Livingstone, Thomas Baines as the artist and storekeeper, Richard Thornton as the geologist, John Kirk as the medic and naturalist, Commander Bedingfield, who was his second in command from the Royal Navy, and they had George Ray as an engineer. And that was the expedition. This first cover shows a letter written by Thornton's sister Helen on the 3rd of August 1858. It was posted on the same day and travelled to South Africa, arriving in Cape Town on the 16th of September. By this time, the expedition had already left for the Zambezi, and Thornton's pencil endorsement, you can see, indicates that it was received on the 4th of October. At that time, he was acting as engineer with Livingstone on the Mar Robert, and they met HMS Lynx lying off the Luaba mouth of the Zambezi. This letter was carried, of course, by sea and had taken only 18 days to reach them. This is an early envelope front in the hand of Dr. Livingstone and signed by him. Again, it travelled by the Lynx, and the London date stamp of the 30th of December is presumably the date of mailing in England. No postage was raised, despite the obvious lack of stamps. And this was sent around the time of the first departure of a member of the expedition. Livingstone quarrelled with Bedingfield, who was sent home in August of that year. In his journal, Livingstone records the arrangements that he made with the governor of Cape Province, Sir George Grey, for a line of communication with the expedition from Cape Town to the Zambezi. And he describes it as by means of donkeys and native teachers. You can see here that this was quite a complex process and took nearly 3,000 miles. The donkeys at that time were thought to be immune from the malarial effects of the tsetse fly. And you'll see at the top, this shows the endorsements of 2 of the forwarding agents. Livingstone was really not a good leader, and he was much better with the native bearers that he had than he was with Europeans. And his disagreements with other members of the expedition continued. This is probably the first OHMS envelope originating in this part of Central Africa, written on the 21st of July 1859, when Livingstone was at Senna, and it was sent to Thomas Baines at Tete. You see the mark of the cleft stick there. In it, Livingstone says, "You will therefore consider your salary stopped and yourself separated from the Zambezi expedition from the 30th of July next." At the back of this, there's a fascinating little endorsement by General Gordon's brother, stating its authenticity. As previously noted, there were some disagreements between Livingstone and Thornton, so much so that Livingstone at one point dismissed him as well, and he went off to Kilimanjaro. But on his return from that, he was reinstated at his own request on much more favourable terms. And he volunteered to go to Tete to bring back some much needed supplies. While he was on his route there, he contracted blackwater fever and died on the 21st of April, 1863, being buried the following day. This is a fascinating letter from Thornton's brother George again. It arrived, or at least left Bradford in March 1863. By the time it arrived in Central Africa, Thornton was dead, and you'll see that Dr. Livingstone has readdressed it and sent it back, and it took almost a year to the day to complete its journey. The expedition can really be considered to have finished in July 1863, when Kirk left for home. Livingstone stayed on and completed his work there, winding everything up, and finally left on the 26th of April 1864, 4 days after he issued this last bill, which was carried by the Royal Navy. And you'll see it was for £120, 9 shillings and 4pence, which was paid in Lisbon at the rate of exchange. Livingstone returned to Africa for the final time in 1866, calling at Zanzibar on his way. He was destined to search unsuccessfully for the source of the Nile. And Zanzibar was to be his staging point and the source of his supplies. He'd been advertising widely the skills and talents of the young John Kirk, who was subsequently appointed to be the political agent and consul, but he hadn't yet arrived at the time when Livingstone set off. This is a fascinating letter from Kirk to Young. Paraffin Young, the man who invented fracking, was at Strathclyde College with Livingstone in the 1820s and actually paid £1,000 to finance this final journey. You'll see on it that there was no route into the interior at this time, and only passing ships could carry mail. They went either via Seychelles or up to India for posting and onward transmission. This is the only known cover from Kirk at this period, although 3 from his wife Helen Cook do survive. In 1861, James Stewart had arrived in Central Africa to join Livingstone's expedition as a missionary. He delayed his departure in order to escort Mrs. Livingstone out to the Zambezi, which of course was to be her last journey. She only survived 3 months once she arrived. And at the end of the expedition, he went back to England, but was appointed in 1866 to the Lovedale Mission in South Africa, where he became principal in 1870. And then 6 years later, he was back in Kumane, where he travelled to the interior to found the Livingstonia Mission for the Free Church of Scotland. And you'll see from the map, the map is of the lake is superimposed on a map of Scotland, just to give you some idea of scale. Stewart founded the first Livingstonia mission at Cape Maclear, wickedly unhealthy, and it subsequently moved up to Bandawi before finally arriving at the northern end of the lake. There's very little correspondence from that 1 year that Stewart was back up in Cape Maclear. And so early inward letters to Livingstonia were sent care of Colonel Jose Nunes. This was the same Colonel Nunes that knew Livingstone. He was now the Portuguese vice consul. They were almost certainly conveyed upriver on the Kwakwa into the Zambezi, and then again upstream into the Shiri River. You'll notice that the later cover from Aberdeen was sent via the African Lakes Company, which was the recently formed merchant enterprise, without which the financial and commercial success of Nyasaland would never have occurred. These two are examples of outgoing mail, slightly later than the 1883 ones. These are 1887. But there was, of course, still no protectorate, and there was no postal system. And so the method was to take the mail straight back down the river to Cubbin, where the Portuguese stamps were affixed, and then they were sent to England via Lisbon, travelling through the Portuguese system. The right-hand cover there is the double rate and bears the insignia of the British consulate, which had been founded down there in 1883. And the final slide of this short presentation is one of only two covers known from late 1891, the other formerly in Jerry Simpson's collection, which bear Portuguese stamps, despite the British Post Office having been set up in August 1891. It should have had a British stamp on it, but didn't have. And the reason for that is very intriguing in a sense. There was a very serious insurgence, a native rebellion in November, and the entire administrative staff for the Protectorate went off to try and quell that. And as a consequence, all of the stock was locked away and unavailable. And so all that was possible was the envelope arrived at Blantyre. It received one of the then new Blantyre postmarks, November 1891, and it has sixpence paid under the Portuguese stamp, but there was no possible route of putting a stamp on except to send it back down to Colonel Nunes, who applied the Portuguese stamp, and it went back through the route that had been long established through Lisbon. The addressee in this case, John Stephen, was the chairman of the Africa Lakes Company, and no doubt he would have been surprised to see this return to the old method of postage. And that concludes my short display on these early Central African envelopes. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you so much for that excellent presentation of superb historical material. We now move on to the next presentation, and may I invite David Ciggy to present his material, The Merchant Marks in the Reign of Queen Elizabeth I. David.
Thank you, Richard. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the world of merchant marks in the 16th century. Right, okay, that's better, good. Merchant marks were very important in the 16th century. They occurred on merchandise, invoices, letters, and even gravestones. So they were a major part of merchants' life. And now I need to, sorry, let's start there. So the letters I'm going to be talking about are letters that were sent to the Corsini brothers in London. And these were sent either via the so-called merchant strangers post or the merchant adventurers post. And I'll deal with these separately. These posts, the marks on the posts, were of two main sorts. First of all, you had guild signs, which occurred mainly on the outside, but sometimes on the inside of letters from the continent, identifying the merchant family. And the second type were religious symbols, which included signs of the cross, storogram, and the mystical sign of 4. More information on that later on, actually. So if we move first of all to thinking about the merchant strangers post, this operated between about 1500 and 1600. This was a postal network that was organized by foreign merchants. It was open to all affiliated merchants, including the Corsini brothers. And during the 16th century, there was a massive increase in trade within Europe, particularly involving the migration of Italian merchants from Italy to various cities. And one particular migration that's important was the migration of the Corsini brothers from Florence to London. So that was a great import. Now, what I want to do really is just to show you 3 examples of the letters sent by the Strangers' Post. 2 of them were from Lyon, and 1 of them was from Florence. So let's look at the first one, which was a letter 1575 from the Spina brothers, and you've got, this is letter as it was folded, so it hasn't been opened up at all. You can see this very prominent guild mark. Now these marks were really family marks, but they're called guild marks, which is a bit of a misnomer really, because a guild is where you have different families coming together for a common commercial purpose, such as cloth workers, whereas these of course were simply family marks, and this mark indicated that this letter had travelled, was produced by the Spina family. So that's a major mark. There are various religious connotations here. You've got a cross, sign of the cross over the as part of the mark itself, and quite often these letters you have a cross at the top of the letter. And if you open up the letter and look inside, then you can see that the letter, as with other letters, the letter is dated. Letter is dated the 13th of July 1575, and it's also signed at the bottom. You can just about see the signature of Francisco and Niccolo Spina just there, and these letters were also endorsed by one of the Corsini brothers on arrival. This one was actually endorsed by Filippo Corsini, and this is at the bottom of the letter. And you can see here that you've got the date, but 2 crosses in front, 2 signs of the cross in front, which signifies in the year of our Lord 1575. So there was a very important religious connotation here, and at that time Lyon was very much a city that had problems, religious problems. The Protestants took possession in 1562, and then later on in 1572 there was a massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day, and the Catholics then took possession. So religion was very important. So that's the first of the Lyon letters, and the second one is this one here, which dates from 1585. This is another very prominent family in Lyon at this time, the Capones. The letter is on watermark paper. There's a fleur-de-lis, which is a fleur-de-lis over a cross. The contents of this letter contain are in relation to orders that were made for payment in August. And once again, you can see there's a very prominent guild mark. This is the Capone guild mark. And once again, you can see the letter has been endorsed by one of the Corsinis. This time it was endorsed by Bartolomeo Corsini. And then the third letter that I've got from the Merchant Strangers Post, which has been opened up to show the endorsement, is from Filippo Salviati, dates from 1586, and this letter has a very nice, very clear guild mark, and it contains mention of 26 bales of wool that were being sent via Hamburg and Flanders, and the transit time to London was about 8 weeks. Moving on to the Merchant Adventurers Post, this was an organisation of letter couriers that was set up by English merchants, and the main offices were in York, London and Antwerp. And the Merchant Adventurers Post operated both in terms of domestic mails and also as well foreign mails. And I'm going to talk particularly in relation to domestic mails, and also particularly in relation to East Anglia. I have a particular interest in East Anglia, so I'm going to show you 2 letters that were sent by Merchant Adventurers Post to Corsini's, one from Norwich and one from Yarmouth. And so this is a 1598 letter from John Gillis, a merchant in Yarmouth, to Filippi Corsini in London. It has rather a lovely address. To his loving friend, Mr. Filippi Corsini, merchant stranger, over against the conduit in Gracious Street, give this in London. So that's a rather beautiful address. This has a religious symbol just there on the top of the letter, which was a typical Catholic symbol, I think, of the cross with two vertical lines. The letter was endorsed per AMI. That means it was sent by a friend of John Gillis. It was sent on the 22nd of June 1598. And the letter actually was in response to a request from I think it was Filippi Corsini, that was sent via Giles's brother-in-law in Norwich. And Corsini was asking John Gillis whether he could supply 80 to 100 barrels of mackerels to send to Italy. And the response was that John Gillis could supply 25 barrels, but no more that he could supply. But there was another person in Yarmouth that could supply a further 50 barrels, but they will be 38 shillings per barrel. Which, whether that was good news or bad news, I'm not sure, but that was the message. So an interesting letter from John Gillis in Yarmouth. And then the second letter I've got by the Merchant Adventurers Post is a letter that was written by John Norris in Norwich to Filippi Corsini in London. This is in relation to sales of cloth. John Norris was actually quite an important person. He was the son of the Sheriff of Norwich, but also had dealings with Corsini, not only in cloth, but fruit, stockings and fish. And if you look at the letter itself, you can see that the address is to his loving friend. These addresses can be quite hard to read on occasions. To his loving friend, Mr. Philip Corsini, merchant stranger in London. And at the top of it, you've got this merchant mark, which is a very important religious symbol. It's called a staurogram. And this word comes from the Greek stauros, which means cross. So this mark was a symbol of the cross. So obviously a very important religious symbol. And one other aspect of John Norris was that for some reason, known only to him, he always put the year above the address in his letters. So that's rather a curious thing. But letters from Norwich were quite important, an important part of the Corsini archive. During the 16th century, Norwich was a very, very rich, very affluent city, dealing particularly in wool and cloth. And the letters are an important aspect of the Corsini correspondence. And then coming to my final slide, which is a letter of 1587. And this letter differs from the other letters in that this letter was not actually sent by a merchant. It was actually sent by a forwarding agent. The person that sent the letter was a guy called William Disbury, and he operated a courier service from the continent to London. Looking at the inside of the letter, you've got the merchant marks inside, and this letter is written to Corsini in relation to two things. One is that it's written in French. He was saying that it concerns two cases of merchandise, and the top one, number 5, was merchandise which was already delivered. So the waterman would have delivered case 5 as marked. So this was the actual merchant symbol that at the top was actually marked on the merchandise. And that was fairly straightforward. Could Corsini please pay at the ordinary rate? But the real problem was a second piece of merchandise, which had the lower of these marks. And obviously Disbury wasn't sure whether this was sure it should be going to Corsini. So he sort of said, could Corsini please get back to him, and instructions were awaited. The other interesting thing about this particular letter is the merchant is the seal on the back, a wax seal, and this has a curious mark on it, which is the so-called mystical sign of 4, which is the letter 4 with the cross to the right. And one curious aspect of this, which connects with stamps, philately, is that the very first stamps of the East India Company had this mystical, in 1852, had this strange mark on the design of the stamp. So there's a curious connection here between the world of philately and the world of postal history. Okay, well, thank you very much. So that's the end of my story, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, David, for that very informative and thoroughly well presented presentation of interesting material. We move now to Philip Longbottom, and the title of his presentation is The Netherlands Express Mail. Philip, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm going to show you various examples of express mail from the early days until just before the Second World War. In the early days, mail could be sent express. Usually it was endorsed per express. That generally indicated that a special horse messenger had been used, but it's rare that we have marked on the envelope how much that cost them. These 4 examples I show here are only covers, unfortunately, so we don't know the contents. They all went to the same person, which was the dike reeve in Leiden, who was responsible for dikes around the Rhineland in the vicinity of Leiden. So his job was to sort out any problems with the dikes. So probably most of these letters, since they were urgent, were something to do with the dikes. The second letter, top right, says, in his absence, please forward immediately by express messenger. But of course, we don't know how much was paid for that. The 2 at the bottom are both of the same sort, which was the other common thing. Instead of having a special horse messenger, the letters were sent by an ordinary carrier. But then basically bribery was involved, that if they got there by a certain time, they got usually double tariff or something else like that. So on the one bottom left, if you deliver it by 4 o'clock, you get double tariff. And on the one on the right says tariff 8 stivers if delivered by a certain time on a Sunday. And so quite clearly all these had to be done quickly. Moving on a little bit, this is again, the top left one is another one of the bribery, 6 stivers if delivered. So that's twice the amount. But the one on the right isn't twice the amount. It says tariff if delivered this evening, 2 shillings. That's Brabant shillings, not Dutch shillings. And that's equivalent to about 12 stivers. But the normal tariff for that route would be only 10 stivers. So the bribery is only 1/5. It's only a small amount extra, 2 stivers. Then we come into a very interesting letter, which is particularly of interest to accountants. The United Provinces basically ran the affairs of the territories conquered from the Spanish during the War of Independence. And so this is a letter from Schluis to a town just to a little village just north called Oostburg, and that's in the Staats-Flandern, which is a bit attached to mainland Belgium. And what's happened here is that the officials have arrived in Schluis and said, we want to see the books tomorrow morning. So the mayor of Schluis has had to write a letter to the mayor of Oostburg saying, please appear in the morning. The only problem was that the Schluis in those days was a border town and the gates were locked at night. So it's endorsed that you can't do anything until please stay out as soon as the gates are open in the morning. And then, unusually for these sort of things, we also know that the person who received it has actually endorsed it, that he paid 24 stivers for sending it those approximately 5 kilometers of distance. And then he had to go back by 9:30 to show all of that to the officials. Jump in again. This is another thing that often happened. The top letter on the left, it was basically sent by an express messenger, but the express messenger waited for a return message. So this is Afghanistan Turin Express. Basically, it was sent back by the same messenger. But again, you don't know how much this costs. The one on the right, we've got a bit more idea about costs. This is going from Sneek to Gouw in Friesland. The normal message, the normal route, postal routes would actually be going first, would be through Leeuwarden, which was the provincial capital of Friesland. And it would first of all go north from Sneek up to Leeuwarden and then southeast towards Gouw. But in this case, since I had a special messenger, it probably went directly east, which was much shorter. The express tariff was approximately 3 times the normal tariff, so it's quite a bit more. The bottom one shows that although parts of the journey could be express, other bits could be slow. So this is from Zaandam to Purmerend in 1826, and it's endorsed per express tot Bouksloot. So you had an express messenger as far as Bouksloot, and here probably the letter was handed over to a barge master for the remaining journey north from Bouksloot to Purmerend. Then we have a long gap. This is a gap, of course, when the postal area was reformed and railways came in, which means, and the railways, of course, speeded up the delivery of ordinary mail by great amounts. And the Dutch postal authorities were under strict instructions to expeditiously deliver all mail that arrived. So there often wasn't much extra time to be gained by special delivery. So you find the old special deliveries by a horse messenger died away and new devices didn't come in. Now, from the UPU in the 1870s, then they started having a formalized express service, but with the same, you didn't see much of it within Netherlands until about the 1890s. For this service, you paid an extra 15 cents above the normal tariff, which was exactly the same as the UPU tariff. It remained that way until after the Second World War, after the First World War. The top 2 covers are to the same, from the same person to the same person. So they're going from a stock dealer in Utrecht, and they're going to the Boers in Amsterdam. Both arrived speedily. Now, the thing about express letters in this period now is that they were delivered as quickly as possible, and there was a special post office in the Boers to make sure this happened for these items to the Boers. But these letters also didn't get on the normal postman delivery marks. Postman delivery marks consisted of 2 things. It was a letter to indicate which delivery of the day, plus a number to identify the postman. And of course, in somewhere like Amsterdam, there was already 7 or 8 deliveries a day at this time. So of course, to intersperse an extra express delivery didn't give you a lot of scope. Now, the conventional mail, you see that the top ones are endorsed by a John Brown outfit, which was obviously done by the guy in Utrecht. The bottom ones were the normal post office labels. So you either had a hand stamp, as on the left, or in this early label, which is a roulette label, on the right. And these just delivered in the normal way, and they generally fairly expeditiously arrived. These are now a couple of other further examples. One posted on TPO, which I don't know how quickly it got there, because there's, again, being expressed, there was no postman delivery mark on the back. The one on the right is an official letter. The official mail went post free, but didn't go express fee at that time, so they had to pay the express fee only. And the one on the left just shows you another variation, this time a perforated express label mark. A few more examples of express labels, various sorts, nothing greatly mentioned there. except of course that they can't do the calculation on the top right, where they've only put 15 cents worth of stamps on for 18 cents worth of postage. It was very common when sending mail to Antwerp or even to Germany during the First World War to send it express or registered. I'm not sure what they gained by the express or registration. It might be that they just thought a little bit more care would be taken over the letter and it will get there a bit more quickly. But it certainly wouldn't have made a lot of difference. A few more express labels. Another one during the war. But here it's got at the top the mark Brievenbus. Brievenbus means postbox. In other words, this has not been handed in as a post office as it should have been. It's been put in a postbox, which means the bit of the express service you get between handing it to the post office and getting on the train has been lost, and you'll only get some extra acceleration at the other end. The one on the right is a similar sort of thing going to Germany after the war. The one on the bottom left is one after the war, but down to Brussels. The thing about this now, you've got this sort of slightly different colour of express label. And then change the express labels yet again, this time for red ones. We've got a very nice example of an early airmail letter sent to Shell in London with both an early KLM etiquette as well as the express feed. But by November 1922, the UPU tariff had gone up to 40 cents rather than the previous 15 cents. The quickest way I've just gone back to this one, which I forgot to mention. On the bottom left, this was an unusual one. It's a letter from Amsterdam to Longbottom, but it's mentioned on the back that the household who was to receive it didn't want to sign the receipt for the express letter, and so it was taken back to the post office and then just delivered normally. It was probably delivered within another hour, just normally, because it's got a besteller mark of F, which was the sixth and last delivery of the day, probably delivered 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. The quickest way to send mail between the wars was often to take your letter along to the railway station, and you sent it from your local railway station to the nearest railway station destination, and for that you paid a 10-cent railway stamp fee, and you see that's cancelled by a railway mark, not a post office mark. You also put on this letter enough postage to cover normal postage plus the post office express fee. When it arrived at the arriving station, the station authorities would hand it over straight away to the postal authorities, and then they would deliver that as an expressed item. It was also possible that the normal express fee only included a delivery to addresses that were not more than a half uur gaans from the delivery office, so about 2.5 kilometers, but it was always defined in terms of a walk. And so you had to pay an extra fee of 15 cents per quarter uur gaans, quarter hour walking, or about, which works out at 12 cents per kilometer, which was collected in postage due. This extra rate was the same from 1894, I think, when it was introduced, until the Second World War. And in this case here, you had a letter which paid the 6 cents ordinary letter fee. In those days, then by that date in 1933, the express fee had come down to 10 cents, so the 10 cents express fee, and then you had to pay 26 cents, which was collected by means of postage due stamps, because of the fact it was a couple of kilometers extra further away than allowed. And the very last letter I've got is just another letter of an example of another express letter sent through the railway. And you notice these last two have the last sort of express label with the white express label with Spoedbelasting. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Philip. That was most interesting and instructive. We now move to our final presentation of the afternoon, and I'd invite Nick Coverdale to talk to us about the first stamps of Serbia in 1866. Nick, the floor's yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to introduce the first stamps of Serbia, which were issued in 1866. I believe that a presentation like this should, if possible, tell a story, so I'll spend a little bit of time setting up the background. Historically, Serbia had been part of the Ottoman Empire for many years, but by the 1860s, it was a more or less autonomous principality. Formally, it was still a part of the Ottoman Empire. A currency of 40 para equals 1 grosh was used. Serbia was not the most literate of countries, and so correspondence was relatively scarce. Internal mail was paid for by the recipient or the sender. External mail seems to have gone via the Austrian consular post office in Belgrade. So there seemed to be a good political and economic case for Serbia to issue its own postage stamps. In 1865, some essays were produced using lithography by the State Printing Works in Belgrade. These apparently came to light at an auction in 1959. You can see them here as illustrated in a book by Velitsar Kardosh, which, amongst the Serbian collectors, is regarded as the Bible of early Serbian philately. The Postal Act of 25th of January 1866 facilitated the introduction of postage stamps. It was determined that values of 1, 2, 10, 20 and 40 para would be needed, and the stamps would be introduced on the 1st of May 1866. However, the State Printing Works in Belgrade encountered difficulties in setting up to print the stamps. Rapid arrangements were thus made with the State Printing Works in Vienna to have dies and printing blocks produced based around a portrait of Prince Michael of Serbia, with the aim of printing 1 year's worth of stamps and then sending the materials to Belgrade for future printing. It was clear in Vienna that the issue of Serbian stamps was not in the commercial interest of the consular post office in Belgrade, and every possible excuse to delay printing seems to have been taken, and thus the 1st of May target could not be met. So what happened next? The Finance Ministry in Serbia determined to issue something as soon as possible and decided on 1 and 2 para newspaper stamps. Crude printing blocks were produced using a similar design to the essays I showed earlier, using the Serbian coat of arms. The stamps were printed in Belgrade in sheets of 12, and issued in this first printing were 2,040 stamps of the 1 para value and 1,944 stamps of the 2 para value. They were issued to 3 post offices, which included Belgrade, Aleksinac and Kladovo. The stamps were used for the internal mailing of foreign newspapers on arrival in Serbia. All the stamps I'm showing in this presentation are from my own collection, and you can see on this slide the 2 para stamp of the first printing. I don't actually have the 1 para stamp. In any case, it's believed that there are only about 50 single specimens of each value in existence, and you can see from the view of this stamp that the stamps were rather basic. The stamps of the first printing were rapidly used up, and the second printing was issued on the 22nd of May 1866. On this occasion, around 18,000 stamps of the 1 para value and the 2 para value were printed, and on this slide you can see complete sheets of the 1 and 2 para values, each of 12 stamps. On the left, the 1 para with its olive green colour, and on the right, the 2 para value with its reddish brown colour. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a scarce example of a used 1 para stamp with part of a na placeno in Cyrillic script mark, which means paid, and this was the mark used at the Aleksinac post office. The third printing was issued on the 16th of November 1866. On this occasion, there were 6,000 stamps of the 1 para value and 10,000 stamps of the 2 para value printed. Here you can see an example of the 1 para and a sheet of the 2 para. The 1 para stamps of this printing are known only as single items with no multiples or complete sheets. The fourth and last printing was issued on the 14th of December 1866. This time there were just 10,000 stamps of the 1 para value printed, and no stamps of the 2 para value were printed. Here you can see an example of a complete sheet of the 1 para value. Unlike other examples of the complete sheet shown, this sheet has no margins. Only around 20 sheets of this value are known, with only 4 of those known to have complete margins. The individual stamps of this printing are more plentiful than those of the other printings, as residual stocks were sold to dealers. It is generally fairly easy to assign a stamp to its position on the plate from the typical plate floors. This slide shows a sketch of the main plate floors for the 1 para values as taken from the aforementioned book by Kardosh. Plating can often be done by the naked eye without recourse to magnification. The 10, 20 and 40 para Prince Michael stamps printed in Vienna were finally issued on the 1st of July 1866. The 1 and 2 para Prince Michael newspaper stamps were issued on the 11th of March 1867 to replace the coat of arms stamps. And you can see on this slide the 10, 20 and 40 para values. And that very brief presentation concludes the story of the first stamps of Serbia. So thank you very much for your attention.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the presentations for this afternoon. It's been a very varied range of material that we've seen, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Now, we now move on to questions, and I'll hand over to Mark to field the questions to the appropriate presenter.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And we do have a couple of questions. I'm just bringing the chat box up here on my screen. Right, there it is. Okie doke. So the first question is for David Sweeney and comes from Frank. I hope you can hear us, David. Can someone unmute David? Because
Hello.
David. Hi.
Hi.
So here's the question for you that comes from Frank. Frank would like to ask. Let me just find it again. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't make you out. Could you just repeat that, please?
I will. Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can indeed. Yes.
Right, okay. Frank asks the following question. He says, on slide 7, you showed us a cover from Bergamo with 4 10-cent stamps instead of the 1 40-cent stamp. He then says in the UK, smaller offices often didn't stock tuppenny stamps, so often you see multiples of 1 penny stamps being used. Was this the case in Italy?
That's a very good question. I wish I could answer it. Normally, in a town as large as Bergamo, there would be a reasonably large amount of mail travelling through, and the post offices would normally be well supplied with stamps. Did you hear that?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you, David. You don't need to keep asking, can we hear you?
No, I'm saying why. Oh, it's okay, I'll explain later. Yeah. The post office, unless it may have been a small post office within the city, but normally the mail I've had from that area has always had the 40-cent or a pair of 20s. And that's all I can say about it. I'm sorry.
All right, well, thank you. That definitely answers that question. Cheers. The next question is for David Ciggy. David, if you'd like to make sure you're unmuted.
Yep. Okay. Yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay. So this question comes from Charles Oppenheim, who asks, bearing in mind that England was Protestant at the time that you covered in your talk, and Catholics were viewed with suspicion, was the use of Catholic symbols in the correspondence problematic for the senders or receivers?
Okay, no, I think it's a very interesting question actually, because I think there were some merchants that were very much not Catholic. I mean, there's one I got from a guy called Hugh de Lobel in Colchester. He was a Huguenot refugee, and there are no symbols whatsoever on his letters. So I think that, you know, where you are a strict Protestant, there are no symbols. Other merchants did seem to have symbols, and it just seems likely that they were of a Catholic inclination. But whether it was wise of them to have the symbols on is a good question, actually. Good question.
Right. Well, at the moment, Richard, those are the two questions that we've had. I think everybody else has been just wowed by the talks, and clearly all of their questions have kind of been answered by the speakers as part of their presentations. So I would like to say that the Q&A session is complete. I'd like to hand back to you, please, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Yes, I echo your statement about the quality of the presentations. It's nice to have all the questions answered in advance. May I now ask Frank Walton to present the vote of thanks to all our speakers on behalf of everybody who's attended today. Frank, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody. I have to say, I love these regional meetings. I think it's the backbone of the society. It's just a pity that people from the Northwest and indeed further afield couldn't actually come to 15 Abchurch Lane and have a good look round, because historically we've had huge audiences in the building for these events, and of course many people don't get too many opportunities to come to London, and this is one of the occasions when they would have made the trip, I'm sure. I actually counted items from 6 centuries and 4 continents today, which is, again, you never get that sort of breadth typically on a one-person talk. So it's just a great testament to this this genre, shall we say. One thing that did catch my eye today, I think this is a trend generally across the whole world of philately. Out of 6 exhibits, we've had 5 postal history and 1 traditional. And that's a trend which I do see coming and keep coming. So I personally enjoy it all. So I'm not going to criticise anybody for not showing stamps. I think it's great what we've seen. So I'm not going to pick out any individual people, but gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for taking the trouble. I thoroughly enjoy myself as ever. And of course, inevitably, I learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank, for your very kind and generous words. I too endorse what you said, that fascinating subjects and a wide range of very well balanced material, and as you said, it's what regional meetings are all about. And this being the first one that we've done as a virtual Zoom presentation, I think it has gone extremely well. We move on now to the presentation of certificates, and Mark, I need your assistance here, if that's all right. Do you have the certificates available?
I do indeed, and I will share my screen so that we can all see them. And we'll just go through them in the sequence that I've got them here, Richard.
Yes.
Just with while I bring that up on the screen. All right. I hope that everybody can see that. Richard?
Yes, I can.
Good. So do you want to speak about each one as I put it up, or shall I just talk them through?
No, I'll say just a few words about each one.
Over to you then.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for organising everything today. It's, as I said earlier, the pilot regional meeting via Zoom, and it's gone extremely well. And you will, in due course, receive through the post the certificate that you see on the screen. Thank you very much indeed for everything you've done.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to do it. It's been a great meeting.
Julian?
Yes, Richard?
Late fees from Liverpool, a subject that's very close to me geographically.
I wouldn't mind.
And to you, because I noticed that with Ian, there are 3 of us from the Wirral present today. And you and I are almost within shouting distance.
Yes, I can hear you.
And I'm not standing in the garden either. Thank you indeed for that presentation. I do like late fees, and it was a subject that I found very interesting indeed. So, and your certificate will arrive through the post in due course, and I don't think it will bear a late fee.
Thank you, Richard.
David, your certificate is on the screen now. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Your presentation was first rate and interested everybody. We're getting comments from people how much they enjoyed the series of presentations this afternoon. And again, snail mail will bring you the hard copy of the certificate you see on the screen in due course, and my sincere thanks for all the hard work you put into everything. Ian, you're the another person close by geographically. I think you're in New Brighton.
Yeah.
And I'm in Parkgate. We're just outside shouting distance. Thank you for your presentation. I like anything to do with Central Africa. Colin said to me when we did the rehearsal on Tuesday, I thought you'd like that one. Yes, fascinating and a piece of history. Thank you so much.
Been a real pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Okay. David, you and I have met previously, and I've seen your presentations before. And historically, what can I say about the material that you showed? It was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. And again, it will wing its way via Royal Mail in due course. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Philip, when I first saw the title to your presentation, I thought, well, this is going to be quite modern. And then you showed things that went back several hundred years. And it was fascinating, excellent, and matched with everything else that was this afternoon in terms of balance, quality, and you've got some superb covers in that collection of yours. I'm envious. The certificate will arrive in due course, as I've said to everyone else, and thank you so much for the contribution that you've made to the success of the afternoon.
Thank you very much. I'm greatly honoured.
And Nick, that was excellent. First, I know nothing about the first stamps of Serbia, and you set the thing off with explaining the background from the outset, which sets the scene, and then you illustrated it. It was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. And the certificate will be on its way in due course.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Nick. Colin, I know you've been in the background as a consultant, and you've done a lot to encourage everybody and point out where the difficulties may be hidden. And thank you so much for everything that you've done and brought all your experience to bear to make it a thoroughly successful afternoon.
Thank you, President. And can I say particularly how much we've enjoyed working with the Northern Ireland region. That's been a great pleasure and very much a novelty, and I hope it continues.
Yes, so do I. Thank you very much indeed for saying that. And Michael, what can I say? You're as experienced as your co-host now. I don't think he feels threatened, though. Thank you for everything that you've done. And I know that when it's a mix of everyone opening the screen themselves and sharing it, and you've then got other ways of doing it, mixing the two together and making sure everything is balanced and goes smoothly. I'm delighted that everything went the way it did, and that was down to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Certificate's on its way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the meeting proper. I will mention one thing, that our next meeting, Zoom meeting, is on the 22nd. And that, as Mark mentioned at the start of today's meeting, is about Herm Island, and it's largely postal history, with a lot of social aspects to it, because we will hear about the inhabitants, and some of them, I believe, were quite colourful. I won't say anything more at this stage.
Wallabies.
Now, just to mention that our first physical meeting is planned, as I said earlier, for the 24th of June, and that is in itself a regional meeting when the West Midlands will present their presentation, or series of presentations by them, the members in their region, which has been adjourned, as lawyers would say, on at least 2 occasions. And I know that Stephen Harrison and Gerald Mariner look forward to that as much as I do, and I'm hoping that we will have a very good attendance indeed for that. And also there will be meetings at almost weekly intervals after that until the 29th of July, which is the date of the AGM. There will be a presentation on that date as well. I look forward to meeting as many members as possible, as soon as possible, and that there are no further additional restrictions that stop us what we're planning to do over the next few months. I hope you've enjoyed today. I thought it was magnificent, and I look forward to seeing as many people as possible at the next meeting. And thank you very much indeed for taking part this afternoon, viewing the presentations. It's been thoroughly enjoyed. We now
Richard,
can
Richard,
continue
Frank here.
to chat. Frank, yes.
Sorry, can I just add something from the Publications Committee?
Sure.
People will have seen the new book by Peter Young on Delarue Inks has been advertised. I'm absolutely delighted to say we got a message, I think it was yesterday, saying that the book is now printed, it is now at Pardies, and we're trying to make an arrangement where it can actually be delivered to Abchurch Lane, in which case the staff will start sending out the ones that have been pre-ordered. So if you have ordered one, subject to staff being able to go in and actually handle the mailing, it will be on its way to you very soon. And if you haven't ordered one, why not? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, Frank. As everybody knows, the start from one of my newsletters, that staff will be going back with effect from Monday, and they will be fully back in the office, subject to nothing else interfering with that plan, on the 17th of May. So hopefully we are on our way in moving back towards normality, whatever that may mean.
Richard.
Thank you very much indeed. We can now continue to chat for as long as anybody, people are around and wish to do so.
Richard?
Yes?
Would you like to answer a question that's just come in? Harold,
Depends what it is.
yes, well, the question is to you, I think.
All right, okay.
It's from Harold Krieg, and
Yes.
he asks, are there plans for further Zoom meetings after London meetings resume?
There won't, once the London meetings resume, there won't be any Zoom meetings until the new season. But Council considered this, the meeting on the 22nd of March, and because Zoom meetings have been so popular, and it gives the opportunity for members who can't get to London, and particularly those overseas, to attend such meetings, there will be at least one meeting per month, I understand, during the next season. Now, no dates, I think, have yet been fixed, but one of the vice presidents is in charge of handling that, and there will be more information provided once we've got plans in place for that. There will, as I say, be a presentation on the day of the AGM, and there will be a presentation on the 9th of September, which is before the new season starts, when Peter Cubbin will become president, or will be president at that stage. But that is to accommodate a display that could not be held during my presidency, and it was one which was the only one left without a date, because a number of them will take place during the presidencies of Peter Cockburn, and later Michael Robin. So more information about those in due course.
Thank you, Richard.